Good morning and welcome back to the program. NATO leaders have agreed to deploy more troops along Ukraine's border as Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg warns we're witnessing the transition to a new world order. The extraordinary summit was convened in Brussels 1 month since Russia invaded Ukraine. Sky News Washington correspondent Annalise Nielsen joins us live from Brussels. Annalise, NATO is pretty worried about the deployment of chemical weapons.
Indeed, and the concern, of course, is that this could escalate and we could start to see Russia threatening again to deploy nuclear weapons, and that was front of mind for so many of the leaders at the summit. But to really emphasise just how significant this was, this is really once in a generation that we've seen 3 such significant events take place on the same day, and that's so much in response to what's happening in Ukraine. We had the G7 leaders meeting at the same time as NATO leaders, European Union as well, and a lot of that's going to come down to a reordering of energy supplies around Europe. We're expecting an announcement on that tomorrow with more US gas coming Europe's way. But that request from Zelensky was what really earmarked the day. What we saw was a very exacerbated leader. He's made this request to leaders around the world to varying degrees of success, but he hasn't been successful in requesting that the air zone over Ukraine get locked down. What we have seen is more military support coming Ukraine's way, but he had a very specific request of 1% of the tanks of NATO countries to be contributed to Ukraine. Even that, we saw that starting to hit the limit of what the UK wanted to contribute. It's not the kind of in-kind support that the US wants to do either, because they're concerned that that could start to get along the lines of taking part in the conflict against Russia. But Zelensky really had this quite urgent plea for leaders that they need to do more after 1 month.
On the 24th of February, I addressed you with a personal request. Please help us shelter our skies in any format. Protect our people from Russian bombs and missiles. We didn't get a clear answer. Ukraine doesn't have powerful anti-missile defense.
Laura, to the point you made earlier about the chemical weapons, I mean, there is reporting coming out of Ukraine that there's evidence that could already be in use. The concern is that this could become widespread, those cases could become confirmed, and then that also puts increasing pressure on other countries to act. It is a clear war crime if that does come to pass, but what the question is what these countries would do in response.
There is a visceral horror of the use of these weapons of mass destruction. I think that if Putin were to engage in anything like that, the consequences would be very, very severe. You have to have a bit of ambiguity about your response, but I think it would be catastrophic for him if he were to do that.
We would respond. We would respond if he uses it. The nature of the response would depend on the nature of the use.
Okay, so the words that are being used against Vladimir Putin are very strong around the NATO table. What's the view, though, of keeping the Russian president around the G20 table?
Well, this is interesting this has even come up at the moment. This isn't a summit that's going to happen until November of this year, but it has highlighted the significance of what China's intervention in this has been, or lack thereof. And that was another consistent theme from leaders today, that they want to see China doing more to put pressure on Russia. They don't want to see them helping sidestep these sanctions, and they want to see Russia feel increasingly isolated. We saw more sanctions against high-profile Russians today announced by the US as well. What we saw, though, was this commentary around the G20. This was a direct question put to Joe Biden, but he was quite unequivocal in that he thought if Russia isn't going to be excluded, he at least wanted Ukraine included, and that, of course, it goes to reinforcing its sovereignty.
Do you think that Russia needs to be removed from the G20?
My answer is yes. That depends on the G20. That was raised today, and I raised the possibility, if that can't be done, if Indonesia and others do not agree, then we should, in my view, ask to have both Ukraine be able to attend the meetings.
Laura, in what was a pretty civil back and forth with Joe Biden's press conference, the wheels really came off at the end. He was asked about domestic politics, and there was a pretty long rant about Donald Trump without naming him and saying that he'd like the opportunity to run against him again. But it was about this question where he's said in the past that sanctions would be a strong deterrent. I mean, the list is as long as your arm of people in the administration who, in the lead up to the invasion of Ukraine, said that the sanctions were a deterrent. And he's continually since then taken issue with the idea that they were supposed to be a deterrent.
Let's get something straight. You remember, if you covered me from the very beginning, I did not say that, in fact, the sanctions would deter him. Sanctions never deter. You keep talking about that. Sanctions never deter.
I don't know, Laura, I've been covering this since the beginning and I heard a lot of talk about deterrence. There's already clips circling around on Twitter of a lot of people in his administration using that exact word.
Yeah, there's a lot of synonyms for deterrence, which all mean the same thing, essentially. Annalise, thanks so much.